On this episode of Newt's World, the fires sweeping across Los Angeles County, California for the past week have burned more than 40,000 acres, or an area slightly larger than Washington, D.C. At least 24 people have died, and more than 100,000 people have been forced to leave their homes. More than 12,000 homes, businesses, schools, churches, and other structures have been destroyed by the fires, and the fires are still raging. I wanted to understand more about how the fires initially began and how they will finally be contained. So I'm really pleased to welcome my two guests, who are both from the City of Laguna Beach in Orange County, California, Mayor Alice Rounaghi and Fire Chief Niko King. Alex and Niko, welcome and thank you for joining the Newt's World.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. It's an honor.
As I understand it, you both were in Pacific Palisades on Monday, surveying the damage and checking in on your Laguna Beach firefighters who were there assisting Los Angeles County firefighters. Tell us for a couple of minutes about that experience. Why don't we start with you, Mr. Mayor?
Well, yeah, Speaker Gingrich, you really cannot overstate the devastation that we saw. The amount of homes that were burned, there were so many of them. And what was remarkable was it wasn't like all the new homes that were recently built were able to stay. Some of the homes that were remaining were old homes. Some were new. It was totally inconsistent. It just speaks to the power of this fire with these winds. The other remarkable takeaway was how people had to evacuate so quickly. At least 24 people have died. But it was remarkable that in some ways that so few people have died, given how much devastation there has been. The other takeaway was how precarious our fire safety is. For Laguna Beach, for example, we have small roads, we have above ground utility lines, we have many of the things that happen in Pacific Palisades. Chief King and our city manager and I, we used it sort of as an opportunity to learn how we could improve our fire preparedness. But again, our hearts go out to those who have lost their lives, those who have lost their homes. And I think it's also just a reminder of how lucky we are to have our first responders and firefighters who are literally willing to put their lives on the line to protect all of us. So Chief King can tell us more.
Chief, can you provide insight both into how the fires in Los Angeles began, but also you have folks up there right now helping. How are they doing and what's the impact on them?
Yeah, we were able to send an engine crew initially, which we staff with 3 persons, and it's part of the master mutual aid process. And as the mayor alluded, and we know, this fire, it started, but when it's fanned by up to 90-mile-an-hour winds, heading towards residential areas, you just can't move people fast enough. Sending our crews there, even as close as we are to Los Angeles County and to the Palisades, they're just screaming for resources. Our initial engine that went there, they immediately went into a neighborhood and they're assigned to protect some of the homes. And they made statements like an unstoppable force with the ember showers and a flame front that's coming through the area. And truly their distractions are life safety, which is always our number one priority, and they're just trying to get the folks out. And there's so many people that they said that they had to stop a firefight, put the hose down, and help somebody finish loading their car or give them some sort of direction on how to get out of the neighborhood. But you're exactly right with the question of the toll. It's the adrenaline that the firefighters go through for the initial attack of a fire, and they're operational and active, and you're running on that adrenaline for, in their case, up to 36 hours. And then it's the days following that you're looking at the impact of the disaster, the impact of the several people's lives, and then you start coming into contact with those individuals, those homeowners, and you start to listen to the stories, and you're trying to help people get back into their homes and look at the damage, which is being controlled, and it's happening slowly because there's still a lot of hazards that exist. But you start to process all of the disaster and what you just experienced, and it absolutely takes a toll on those firefighters. It does. Emotionally, you're physically exhausted, and you're experiencing and witnessing a lot of the emotion of someone that just lost everything that they have, and they're trying to figure out what the first next step is.
Should we be bringing in more people from around the country?
I would say they have the resources that they need. I'll stop there and say that When you have a flame front like they witnessed with a 90 mile an hour wind, I don't know that there is enough fire engines with just hose and water that are going to make a big impact. You can't just stand in front of that force of nature and stop it. It's just much too powerful. Our firefighters, as brave as they are, is getting in there, can eventually find a house, at the edge of the fire that maybe they can start putting out small fires and stop the progress. But really, their number one priority is to be in there and to get the people out.
I get the sense that the fire is still a substantial way from being under control. And that if the winds come back up again with the kind of force they've had, it's a real problem.
It is a problem. And we try to front load all of our responses in Southern California with the state of our vegetation and the drought and just the low humidity. We try to have an initial response of several engines and even launching helicopters at the first call to 911 that there's a report of a fire in the wildland. That's been our best tactic. That's what's worked historically. But it's when those small fires quickly outrun the resources that are arriving where you have these major conflagrations. We're seeing it more and more over time. It seems like we're seeing about one a year. And I think it's time the fire service is going to dig in, and we're going to probably look towards different technology and new ways, new approaches to combat these major conflagrations.
For those of us outside of California, what are the Santa Ana winds and how do they get to be so strong?
It's a weather phenomenon that does occur, and if you live in Southern California, you become quite familiar with it. But it has to do with high pressures and low pressures in the western United States, and it's a warmer, dry air that's over Nevada, and as it begins to transfer to a lower pressure, it squeezes through the mountains. It loses all of its humidity and becomes a very dry air, and then as it continues to compress, it goes through canyons and valleys as it goes through the mountains, and then by the time it gets to us here on the coast, it's incredibly concentrated because it's been traveling faster and faster with more pressure behind it. It's extremely dry, and it comes straight through our canyons out into the ocean. So it's expected seasonally, and we're always waiting for it, and that's when we declare our red flag days, and we're in a state of readiness.
Should we have a lot more airplanes that are equipped to deliver fire retardant?
The state of California is very well resourced. Not only are we well resourced, but they are on the ready. CAL FIRE has a large fleet, and then they have contract services for other firefighting, fixed wing, and the helicopters. They're some of the best, and the pilots do some amazing things. As I was looking at a live map that showed all the air resources, it definitely was not a shortage of air resources. As a matter of fact, that airspace is quite crowded. You have to have, dozens or so of helicopters and then the fixed wings with flight patterns and making sure that they're all coordinated and can get to the fire and make their drops and stay at different elevations and move in a certain pattern so they're not creating hazards for themselves. And the state of California does an incredible job at controlling those aircraft.
Mr. Mayor, you've been very innovative in fire prevention in Laguna Beach. Did you pick up anything when you went up and looked at what's been going on that might lead you to in some way change what you're already doing in your community?
Well, I think the good thing, if there is a good thing about our visit to see the devastation, was that it really reaffirmed a lot of the strategies that we're already employing. So, for example, our firefighters showed us a video when they were fighting a fire to prevent it from going into a neighborhood, and there was a 300-foot break that was there because of fuel modification, and you could literally see how physically that was able to stop the fire from advancing at the quick pace that it previously was. So fuel modification is something that we're going to be doubling down on and continue expanding. We can talk more about our GOAT program later. The other takeaway was the need to underground, above ground utility lines. We often think as above ground utility lines as being a cause of fire, and they absolutely are a cause of fire. But when the firefighters are fighting a fire, they were telling us how they have no idea whether or not the above ground utility lines are energized or not. And so that leads them to have to basically be defending themselves against the fire while also making sure that the above ground utility line doesn't explode. They described having wires hanging down, and this also gets in the way of evacuation. And then finally, water. Water is something that we are laser focused on in Laguna Beach. Number one, because we want local water reliability as we deal with future issues from Colorado and from our state water project. We don't want to be dependent on any of them, so we're focused on a plan to get us to 100% local water reliability through desalination to the south and then through a groundwater well with our friends in Newport Beach to the north. So when you have so much demand on the water system, it becomes almost impossible to not run out of water. In 1993, we had one of the most devastating fires in the state of California at the time, and we ran out of water. Since then, we've added 2 reservoirs. We've gone all in on increasing our water supply. But I think we probably need to do even more because these types of fires are the new normal. And so we need to ensure that we have the water resources necessary to never have a situation where our firefighters are fighting a fire and they don't have water.
What percent of your water can you get from desalination?
We can get up to 100%, so we're working with South Coast Water District on the Doheny Desalination Project, but it'll ultimately probably be about a third of our water supply, and then with the other 2/3 coming from our groundwater, which we're partnering with Newport Beach on building a new well. So right now we're on 100% imported water, but our goal in the next few years is to go from 100% imported to 100% local.
That's amazing. And is that mostly through wells?
Yeah, through wells, because we don't have groundwater under us, but we're working on a deal with Fountain Valley and Newport to build the well there, and that'll get us to 2/3, and then the remaining 1/3 will be desal. Because really, Speaker Gingrich, what we're dealing with in California in the future will be earthquakes. We're going to have significant earthquakes that could undermine our reliability. So we want to have a system where we're getting water from multiple sources so that we're not relying on just one source. So we can add that to the list of things to worry about is earthquakes, in addition to fires and all the rest.
The Northridge earthquake was a good example of something which just was tremendously disruptive to traffic in the whole region.
Exactly.
I can't help but ask you, describe in terms of vegetation monitoring, how you got to the use of goats and to what degree that works.
Chief King, do you want to step in here?
It was quite, ingenious for a fire chief to take a look at this program back in 1991. And they are used for grazing and clearing some open space. But as a fire prevention tool, they thought they'd give it a shot back in Laguna Beach. So if people are familiar with goats and what they'll eat, it's just about everything. So the fire chief was able to dedicate some of the adjacent open space next to parcels and is able to utilize these goats. So some of the things that we have to put in place is to make sure that they're corralled and that they're monitored. So we want to keep them where we want them. So there's specific zones that we have that is adjacent to the open space, and we'll put the goats in pens and let them eat up 100% of that vegetation. They'll do an incredible job at clearing it out. Then we have to monitor that so that when they get to a certain point in time and they're eating, that we can move them and rotate them to the next space. It's been an incredible program for us.
I mean, how many goats do you have?
There are several hundred. This last summer, we brought in 3 herds at a time, and I understand there's about 150, 200 goats per herd.
Well, I mean, I got fascinated because the Smithsonian Magazine had run a story that the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, they had used land-clearing goats to eat the flammable brush. And when there was a big fire there, the goats had in fact created a fire break, and the library was safe.
And what's interesting about the goats is that we're actually only able to do them because they were grandfathered in. But the permits now, and I think this is under the California Environmental Quality Act, prevent us from using goats because they eat what the state describes as the high resource habitats or something along those lines. So that's something that I will be working on, is figuring out how we can make it so that we can actually add more goats, because goats are the most cost-effective way to do fuel modification.
I don't get part of this because somebody was doing some calculations this morning. The amount of carbon we're putting in the air with the Los Angeles fire offsets virtually everything California's done to reduce carbon pollution. And in a sense, if goats would have stopped the fire, I'm for the goats. Maybe that's because I don't quite get the way in which Sacramento thinks, but as it seems to me, they ought to be pro-goat rather than anti-goat.
The environment is what makes Laguna Beach special. We don't want to do anything that'll undermine the environment, but I think goats are a way that we can protect our environment and protect public safety, because we know, as you said, when you have a fire, that does not help the environment in any way, shape, or form.
What other fire prevention tools do you use in Laguna Beach and in Orange County?
Right here in Laguna Beach, it's unique because we're surrounded by several hundred acres of open space. And so we look at the edges of our community and where a wildland fire is going to be encroaching. And so we try to create that defensible space behind our homes, our residents' homes, about against the open space. And then we have created, through permitting processes, the fuel modification zones. And that's where we can go in and remove the vegetation, not like the goats do, where they'll remove 100% of the vegetation, but through a permitting process that we can thin the vegetation. And we're trying to protect the native species to California, where we could only reduce that vegetation to 50%, but we're clearing all of the underbrush and the dead vegetation, the annual grasses. And so really what that does is, an approaching fire, it's going to hit that gap where the vegetation's been removed, and it's going to take a lot of the energy out of the fire. And that's where we like to hopefully hit that fire with the overhead resources, the helicopters and the airdrops, and prevent it from encroaching upon the homes.
We want to help people get back into their homes as quickly as possible and as inexpensively as possible. And it seems to me that means that there are a whole range of regulations and rules and organizations, all of them basically slowing down and making more difficult the rebuilding process. And that somehow that has to be a significant part of what we look at in trying to maximize the speed with which we can get people back into their homes. I mean, am I missing something since I'm not a Californian?
Well, absolutely. And so being on the city council now this year as mayor is just a part-time job. My full-time day job is in real estate development. And I've had projects in the city of LA, and the amount of time that it takes to get just like a townhome project approved is ridiculous, where you're moving between so many different departments. So, the residents who lost their homes cannot afford to wait through a 1 or 2 year process. They need, immediate approval, where everyone needs to get in the room and get these approvals quicker. It's also how we're going to ultimately solve the housing supply crisis that we have in California. But I totally agree. There's a lot of regulations that are very important, but we need to be, as we look at how we can rebuild Los Angeles, it's critical that we don't let bureaucracy and regulations get in the way of people rebuilding their homes, because that'll add gas to the fire in many respects.
The other thing, which is a topic I don't frankly understand very well, but that apparently the homeowner's insurance has become a major challenge for those living in high-risk areas. Do you see this kind of an issue in Laguna Beach?
Oh, absolutely. We're having homeowners who are dealing with significant increases in their rates, and some people are not able to get insurance, so they have to go onto the FAIR plan. Really, the root of that issue goes back to a proposition that the voters of California passed that basically requires that any increase in rates has to be approved somewhere in Sacramento. And so what that's led to is a situation where a lot of insurers are just simply getting out of the state of California. And part of the reason why we have an insurance crisis is because the risk is so high. I mean, I saw a number $56 billion plus for the damages here. So in many respects, the amount of risk that people are dealing with by living in California, especially in these high risk areas, has made it so that premiums have to either increase, or if they're not able to increase because of the state, then the insurers are going to go out of the state. So I don't have the answers, Mr. Speaker, but it's going to be a problem that we're going to continue dealing with, because as you know, you can't get a mortgage without insurance. So this really needs to be addressed.
Let me ask you, as you look forward, do you feel that the innovative things you've done in Laguna Beach are sort of validated by what you've seen up in Los Angeles?
I think they are validated, but there's really so much more for us to do, because when you look at, as Chief King was describing earlier, when you have a fire with the winds that we saw in Los Angeles, there's very little that can be done to mitigate it. So the question is, how do we kind of change our playbook and reject the assumptions of what we've been able to do in the past and what fires have been like in the past and really prepare for a new normal? So even though I think we've been heading in the right direction, there's so much more for us to do, and we're not going to take our foot off the gas pedal because, as you know, public safety is the most important role of local government.
You've also made a point I hadn't really thought about, which is you have to be planning simultaneously for the potential for an earthquake, as well as the potential for mudslides, as well as the potential for a really big fire. I mean, all three of those have to somehow be in your city plan.
Absolutely.
Isn't that pretty complicated?
It's very complicated, and it requires one step at a time. Right now, we have our fire stations, all four of them. We haven't built a new fire station in 50 years, and all four of our fire stations, if an earthquake happens, could come down. We're building one. We're about to start building, and so there's so much work to do. And I think a lot of cities in California, we're about to approach our 100-year anniversary in 2027, and a lot of cities like us that are older have not made the proper investments in infrastructure. And I think it's going to be a theme that we're seeing across the state of California. So it's easy to not make those investments in infrastructure because no one's going to get mad at you at the time. But it's important that as leaders, we make those necessary investments because at the end of the day, they're going to be critical for the public safety threats that we face in the future and the present.
So I'm really curious when you think about trying to prevent the huge fires such as the one we're living through now. The GOAT program may really be a major contributor, but what's the relative cost of using goats versus other methods of clearing this underbrush?
Well, goats are absolutely a very cost-effective program. Our estimate is that per acre, goats cost $860, whereas hand crews cost $4,000 an acre. So it's around 20% of the cost of hand crews. So it's the most cost-effective form of fuel modification that we have at our disposal.
Prior to these fires, has the state been increasingly opposed to any kind of clearing of the underbrush?
Well, the state has a lot of permits that are required for fuel modification, but going forward, we cannot get new permits for goats. We can only do them for hand crews. The chief can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
So the state basically is creating a 5-fold increase in cost to have people rather than goats. As an outsider, I'm not shocked, but it strikes me as not very clever. Mr. Mayor, I know you've got to run, and I want to thank you, given everything you're doing. I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be a part of this, so thank you for including us. Thanks.
We've heard a lot, and there have been a lot on TV at least, about the whole process of whether or not Los Angeles itself was getting the resources it needed. And to my surprise, I mean, the police chief's been pretty blunt about this. Do you have any sense of how much underfunded they were and to what degree that weakened their ability to stop the fire?
I've heard what everyone else has heard on the news, and those impacts truly unknown. I know the fire chief made some pretty strong statements, and it looked like there was a memo that she had drafted prior to the onset of these firestorms, and it was addressing the readiness of some of their aerial fleet. And those are obviously very, very expensive resources, and you have to have a lot of the maintenance and the training hours that go along with it. She seemed to be addressing that, but as far as any kind of slowing of the responsiveness of those resources, that's all yet to be determined.
I appreciate it. And I gather that you've been fortunate in that Laguna Beach actually has been seriously concerned and has done a lot of the right things, both about fire safety, but also trying to maintain a really good city.
One of the best benefits is we have a very, very engaged community here. They know that they all live in a state-designated very high fire hazard severity zone, which means that we have the weather, the climate is such that it's conducive to fires. There's a lot of vegetation here, and then we have those Santa Ana wind events that come seasonally. And you look throughout our community, the people are living in some older wood-framed homes. Laguna Beach is on a hillside. Most of our community has a great, beautiful view of the Pacific Ocean. And They love the vegetation that is around their houses in the hillsides. So it's all very, very nice to live here, and it's an incredible climate, but it's these times of years where you're reminded of the risk that comes along with it.
The Los Angeles Times reported today that fire officials are now beginning to look for the source of the fires. When you have something like this, how do you go back and look for the source of a fire on this scale?
The investigative process is a whole different science than fire suppression, and we have specially trained investigators in our profession. It's hard to imagine, but the size and the scope of the devastation that has occurred, you can take it back to what is a logical point of origin, and that's with the given weather conditions and the slope, the topography. You can trace this fire back to a corner where it is probably likely the point of origin. These investigators go in and they are looking for any types of devices, anything that's left behind that might have indicated that there was an accident there, that there's a small campfire, whatever they're looking for is going to be in a logical place near the point of origin. And so they mark it off and they treat it as almost as a crime scene, and until they can prove that it's not, and they secure all the evidence, they send it to labs to get tested. If there is any evidence, more often than not, they'll be able to come up with a cause. Most important is doing those interviews for people that saw the initial line of smoke that was coming from an area that reported the fire, and where was that? And I heard indications that they were looking into a fire that had happened previously from New Year's Eve, and that might have been the area. So they just take those leads and those reports and they continue to follow up on them until they can find that cause.
If you don't mind my asking, Chief, how long have you been involved in firefighting?
This is my 34th year in the fire service.
Wow. So if a young person happens to be listening to this podcast, would you encourage them to consider being a firefighter?
Oh, it's the best profession in the world.
Why is that?
When I was younger, it was about the physical challenges that were there, and you get to be outdoors, and it's not going to be confined in an office. That was first and most attractive to me. But as I jumped into the career, you start realizing that the cliche of, I like to help people, well, that's real. It's real. You get to, on a daily basis, respond out of a fire station, and you make those human connections, and you really do get to see the difference that you make in people's lives. There's no question about it. And as trained EMTs and paramedics especially, along the lines of just having that experience and seeing more and more, you realize the value and the difference that you can make in this profession. To that end, people really do appreciate the firefighters. So you couldn't think of a better profession where people are incredibly grateful to have the fire service and the profession around.
You know, I want to thank you for joining me. I realize how really busy all of you are right now, but you're helping us better understand the challenges of Los Angeles and the firefighters who are facing to really try to bring these wildfires under control. Our thoughts and prayers are with those firefighters, with the first responders, and with all the people who are really in danger of losing their homes and losing everything they've collected their whole life. So around the country, I think we're all thinking about and praying for the Angelinos. Been through such a terrible and traumatic thing, and you really were a help coming on and talking to us.
Well, it's been an absolute honor, Mr. Speaker, to not only meet you, but to share some of the great stories of what the firefighters in the state of California and across the country are going through right now in Los Angeles. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you to my guests, Mayor Alex Rounaghi and Fire Chief Niko King from the City of Laguna Beach, California. You can learn more about the California wildfires on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Pendley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.